My name is Andy Conlin, and I'm the Assistant Outreach Specialist for Colorado State University's Comet Farm team under the leadership of Dr. Keith Postian. This is a demo presentation for creating a multi-accounting project in Comet Farm. So this will include cropland, animal ag, and agroforestry. In this case, because it's a lot to fit into an hour, I'm sticking with agroforestry just because it's also a little bit more in-depth than forestry, and so we want to do the more complicated option if we can. I'll preface this by saying that I'm not a soil agronomist or an animal ag expert, so if there are any questions that I cannot answer, I'll write them down and talk to the experts on the team and get back to you. Feel free to drop questions in the chat, but I'll also try to leave some time at the end to answer questions as well. As you can see, we are diving right into the demo for Comet Farm. Our other trainings for cropland and animal ag have an introductory slideshow that talks more about the tool, comparisons between Comet Farm and Comet Planner, stuff like that. So if you haven't gone to one of those trainings and want kind of that overview of the tools, then I'd suggest joining one of those trainings. So the first thing that you'll see when you open Comet Farm is you'll get this welcome window. While it's easy to just kind of close out of it and not read it, this window often has important information. So for example, right now, for people who are participating in the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities project, we have a survey linked for participants to take. Otherwise, we often have version updates and other information available. So I'll go ahead and close that, and let's zoom in a bit because I imagine, there we go. So some other things to point out. The Comet Quarterly newsletter is available on the homepage. This features updates. Some users might share how they are using the tool. Some examples using such as Shelburne Farms in Vermont, American Farmland Trust, Carbon Cycle Institute are featured in a couple different newsletters. And then they also include major updates to the tools. One is coming out this month, so keep an eye out for that. For upcoming trainings, you guys have already clearly found this tab because you registered for this training, but I do want to draw your attention just to the fact that Haley and I, and Haley is on this call with me, the outreach team hosts office hours on Mondays and Wednesdays, and they are opportunities for you to come to us with questions. We have basics office hours where if you're new to the tool and just kind of have basic questions about entering data, creating your baseline, anything like that. And then on Wednesdays, we have advanced office hours that are more for people familiar with the tool already who have perhaps a little bit more complicated questions. And then also worth noting is the USDA greenhouse gas methods, otherwise known as the Blue Book. The Comet tools were developed in parallel with and as a function of the Blue Book document, which is also called Quantifying Greenhouse Gas Fluxes in Agriculture and Forestry. Comet implements a set of computer models that simulate all the greenhouse gas emissions that have been emitted within a defined entity. Soil-related emissions are calculated through the DACENT model, which is the principal soil carbon and now direct nitrous oxide estimation model in the tool. But DACENT is used in the Cropland accounting tool only. In September of 2022, we switched from the 20 centimeter to the 30 centimeter DACENT model to align with the national inventory. And those who have attended, again, those cropland and animal ag specific trainings got an intro presentation that dives deeper into DACENT. So if you want to learn more, again, I recommend attending one of those. When I send a follow-up email after this training, I'll also include an introductory paper for DACENT. Aside from DACENT, accounting for animal ag is also available, and different livestock have different empirical models associated with them, and the same goes for forestry and agroforestry. It's also worth noting that this blue book is currently open for public comment. So these methods that are outlined in the blue book are going to inform the empirical methods that we use in COMET. And so if you want to make any comments about something that you think could be included in the future, we highly recommend doing that. I'll also point out briefly COMET Planner. It is a, I'll show you at the end if we have time, but COMET Planner is, the idea behind it was to create a tool that was simpler and easier to use than COMET Farm and could demonstrate the relative benefits of NRCS conservation practices within a given region against baseline data. So all you need to know is your location, the conservation practice you'd like to assess, and how many acres of land that will be applied to. So it only takes 4 clicks and generates on-the-fly results. Again, other things on the homepage that are important to note. I'll point out this Need Help widget in the lower right-hand corner of your page. This is populated with help documents for some of our most frequently asked questions. You can pretty much type in anything and you'll see quite a few articles that might be relevant. And the nice thing is this Need Help widget follows you from page to page. So no matter where in the tool you are, you can type in a question and hopefully find an answer to something that you're looking for. If you don't see an article that answers your question, you'll see this option to contact us. And the nice thing here is that there's the option to attach a screenshot or take a screenshot. This is really helpful for Haley and I because we aren't mind readers. And so sometimes it just helps to get a visual of what you're looking at so that we can provide the best solution. So that is a huge asset to new users in particular. Alrighty, well, I will go ahead and start diving into the demonstration. When you first start using COMET Farm, it'll ask if you'd like to sign in, create an account, or continue without registration. We strongly encourage you to create an account because while you can create a project without creating an account, if you navigate away from that project, all the data that you've input will be lost. Whereas if you register and create an account, you will be able to pause and return to your project at your own leisure. So I'm going to sign in because I do have an account. And what we're going to do today is we're going to be creating a new project, partially from scratch, and partially called a demo project. And a demo project is pre-populated with all the data that you might need to run a report. So when you come to the tool page, you'll have a project repository, all the projects that you've created, and those will be listed in alphabetical order. If we were creating a project from scratch, we would click down here to create new project and then select the activities that we're interested in accounting for. But today, because part of our project is going to be a demo project, I'm going to click create demo project. And demo projects will only pre-populate one of the activities that you select. And so today I'm going to have animal ag be pre-populated and then everything else I'll be inputting from scratch. Anytime that you see dev next to anything, just know that that's something that we see on our end and not something that you'll see on yours. Oh, and then demo projects are a little finicky in that you cannot have more than one open at a time. So that was the little alert that I got, is just that I need to delete that old demo project before I can create a new one. So let's try that again. Okay, so once you create a new project, it'll actually appear at the bottom. You'll know that it's selected because of the caret and it being bolded. And then again, because this is multi-accounting, I'm going to also select Cropland, and I'm also going to select Agroforestry, but those two will not be pre-populated with data from the demo. And then you just click Define Activities to get started. Okay, so the first step in, and I'll preface this by saying, Comet dictates the order with which you input your data. So it's auto defaulting to beginning with the Cropland accounting project, and then we'll go Animal Ag, and then we'll go Agroforestry. So the first step in Cropland, which is our first set of data that we're going to be inputting, is to define your parcels. This portion of, or this accounting activity pulls in information from the Surgo soil database to create map units, and we'll throw in an error if you include non-agricultural land, such as housing or water. So I am located in Fort Collins, Colorado right now. And so I am going to pick some agricultural land that's around here. And again, you can navigate yourself or you can type in a zip code. There are a couple different ways that you can define your parcels. The first you can see is to add a parcel by point. And in that you click generally the center of your parcel, and then you'll have the option to input how many acres are included in that parcel. That's not my preferred method of defining my parcels, so I'm not going to do that one, just demonstrating. My preferred is to add parcels by polygon. This allows you just a little bit more freedom to make the shape of your parcel a little bit more defined. And like I said, because you don't want to include any non-agricultural land, it kind of can help you navigate around features of the parcel that you don't want to include. And this is going to be the parcel that I use in the demo. I'm just going to keep the default title as field 1 and save the location. It's then going to give you the option to add another parcel. And again, for the sake of the demo, I'll also show you how to add a parcel by circle, which is convenient when there are these circular parcels right near me. So you're going to click in the middle of your circle and then drag out, and that would be your next parcel. Again, I'm just going to stick with one field for today for the sake of time and convenience, but you can add up to 50 fields, and those parcels are limited to being 1,100 acres in area. We do not recommend creating 50 1,100 acre parcels. The soil map units are included in your fields and are going to run models on every map unit in your field and then provide a weighted average in your report. So the more map units included in your parcels, the longer it's going to take for your report to generate. You have the option to click on this soils tab. Oh, and it works this time. It doesn't always work. And this allows you to see those map units. Again, the greater number of fields, greater in area, and the higher number of scenarios, the longer it's going to take for your report to generate. So I am going to just stick with my one parcel. I could modify it if need be. I also could have uploaded a Esri shape file. That's the last way that you can define your parcel. So once I'm done, I'm going to click this orange button at the top that says I'm done defining parcels. Okay, so next is going to be implementing or inputting historic management for your cropland. So a lot of people will ask, what if I don't know my historic management? Because for example, in this parcel, you're asked to input pre-1980 management, and you can select from this drop-down menu. We just recommend that you try your best, and that's all that we can ask you to do. We also recommend sometimes reaching out to your local extension office or resource conservation districts, and sometimes they can give you an idea of how the land was managed prior to 1980. So I'm going to give my best guess here. It'll ask if your parcel was enrolled in a CRP. I'm going to say no. And then it'll ask again for 1980 to the year 2000. And again, I'm just going to make my best guess there. And it'll also ask for tillage. I'm going to guess that this land was intensively tilled prior to the year 2000. We only have one field, so this is only going to be one step, but if you did have more than one field, you would be asked to create or to complete the historic management for all of your parcels. The nice thing that you can do is use this copy feature to copy the management from one parcel to another. So if you know that all of your parcels were managed the same historically, then you can just copy that same management data across and save yourself some time there. When you see this option to set your baseline period, the baseline period that we're referring to throughout the presentation is your business as usual or your current management before you make a management change. Comet Farm is a tool for conservation scenario analysis to compare changes in emissions between your current management and a future management scenario. So generally, I stick with the default baseline, which is from the year 2000 to the year prior to our current year. So in this case, you can see up here that it is from 2000 to 2022. The only reason I would adjust my baseline period is if my change in management that I'm looking to estimate occurred in like 2016 instead of 2022. So that's the only reason, and therefore I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to click next. All right, so the next step will be to input your baseline management. So again, that's your current business as usual management, and we're still in the Cropland tool. This pop-up is asking if I want to create a crop rotation, which I will. It's a shortcut, which I will show you what to do. But I also want to show you how to do it manually. So I'm going to say no thanks. So in order to do it manually, you can select what type of crop you're working with, an annual crop versus seasonal versus an orchard vineyard crop. And then there is a drop-down menu where you can select the crop that you're interested in calculating for. We are limited in what crops are available in our drop-down menu based on what is parameterized in DECENT. You can try to find a surrogate crop that's modeled similarly. So as an example, if you want to model trit, you can use winter wheat as kind of a surrogate. Some crops are just unfortunately not available for accounting either because they're not parameterized or because they don't have a surrogate. An example of that is onions are not included. So that's a current limitation, but we do have a laundry list of crops that people are always asking for, and maybe, not guaranteed, if it's asked enough, we'll work to get it parameterized. That's another opportunity to bring up the fact that the Blue Book is currently open for public comment. Feel free to comment on it. That's what it's out for, and it's available until July 10th is when comments are open. So for the sake of this presentation, I'll go ahead and select corn. And then you'll be asked, based on your crop, to input a planting and harvesting date. I'm going to say that corn is planted around in May. I'll go with May 5th. And then to add a new harvest, you just select this plus button. And again, you have to select your harvest date. And so let's see, planted in May, let's go ahead and have this harvested on October 5th. You'll see the option to harvest the grain, fruit, seed, root, or tuber, and then the option to put in your yield. You're welcome to go ahead and enter your yield, but it's only going to impact your report if you also include a burning event. And that's because DECENT will simulate its own yield based on parameters that you've included, along with that soil data and the PRISM weather data set. So I can go ahead and put in that my yield is 50, but I'm not going to put in a burning event. So this isn't going to impact my report. Let's see. Then I can go ahead and click next. Oh, I actually should probably talk about grazing. Grazing events or grazing period, you're welcome to input. However, a source of confusion sometimes is that this grazing does not account for enteric emissions from the livestock that are doing the grazing, because that's considered outside the entity of the field. Instead, if you want to account for those enteric emissions, you would do that in the animal ag accounting project, which we are today. So that's good. Okay, so next you're asked to implement tillage. And we recommend that you have your tillage occur before your planting event. So my corn was planted on March or May 5th, so I'm going to have that occur on May 4th. I'm going to keep it intensive. If you have crops planted and then you have a tillage event occur after that, DASENT is going to consider that the crops being killed. And so you might get some funky results based on that. I can go down and continue to click next through all of these things, but these panes are actually all interactive, so you don't have to go all the way through every single thing. Like if I wanted to skip to burning right now, I could. I am going to go through everything. Next, you can implement irrigation. You can have it occur as a single irrigation event by keeping the dates the same. You have the option to auto irrigate, or you can keep the dates separate and say, you know, for a whole month, I want irrigation to occur once a week. So there are 6 days between those irrigation events. And yeah, you can add as many of those as you deem relevant. We have manure and compost applications as an option as well. I'm going to skip that. We can add a fertilizer application, and I'll stick with the default, but I'll apply it on the day of planting. And this will all be deemed somewhat irrelevant when I show you a different shortcut. So that's kind of why I'm not putting much consideration into the choices I'm making right now. And then liming and burning are your last 2 options. So from here, this means that we have put in all of our management information for our first crop in our first year of our baseline. And so on the left, you'll see that we still have all these undefined categories. When you finish that first year and you click skip ahead, you actually will be given the option to either add an additional crop for the same year. And what I'll note here is that we do have the limitation of only 1 crop can grow at a time in DASENT. And so you can't have overlapping planting and harvest dates across years. And additionally, there's a limitation of only 3 crops per year. So when you add your additional crop for the same year, that's just something to take into consideration. A lot of times people get funky results, and it's because a planting and harvest date overlapped. But I'm going to continue. You'll see this green check here means that we are working with the year 2000 and that corn management data that we've implemented. So this copy and crop feature allows you to copy management to any year in your baseline that you'd like to copy it to. So if I have a crop rotation where I'm planting and harvesting corn every other year, rather than manually going through and putting in that same management over and over and over, this feature allows me to copy all of this information to alternating years. So I'm going to click no thanks and or I'm going to click copy and continue. And then on the left, you can see that now every other year is populated with that corn, and they're all managed the same. So if I go to 2002, my irrigation is just how I implemented it in the first year. So that is how we would manually enter crops into our cropland accounting data. However, that first pop-up that came on when you first started this page about if you wanted to create a crop rotation, and I said, I'll show you that later. This is a huge shortcut. So this drag and drop crop rotation, I'm going to show you this, allows you to select from 25 crops that we have templates for. And these templates include things like typical planting dates and harvesting dates, fertilizer application rates, and stuff like that. So if I wanted to save myself some time, and I knew that in the end I was going to be creating a rotation of corn and soybean, instead, I can drag corn over, I can drag soybean over, I can just select a binary yes or no, were they irrigated? And then from this drop-down menu, I can select how they were tilled, and I'm going to stick with intensive till. It's important to note, though, that this feature does overwrite anything that you've done manually. And so in my case, the corn that I've implemented is going to be overwritten, but I'm okay with that. So I'm going to create a rotation. And then as you can see, it's auto-populated corn and soybean. It's put in kind of typical planting dates. I wasn't too far off with a common corn planting date being in May and October. I was off on the yield that it includes, but that's okay. Yeah, and then you've essentially completed your baseline. I'm going to keep moving because we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to skip ahead and I'm going to say, no thanks, continue. This time I do not want to copy any management to other years, so I'm going to say no thanks. And then we're going to continue to feature management. So this is where you're going to have the option to create your future management scenario. So this is the change in management that you're interested in looking at. So we've already done our business as usual. Now I want to assess, what if I change something? In this case, I'm going to create a scenario where I switch from intensive to no tillage. And this button is very important. It allows you to copy management information from your current management. So if you are only changing one or two aspects of your management, such as shifting from intensive to no tillage, I highly recommend using this feature because it makes it so you don't have to go in and enter manually all that same data again. So if I select this, it means that I don't have to create the crop rotation, select irrigation dates, planting dates, all that. All I can do is go in and adjust my tillage, which is what I'd like to do. You also have a few shortcuts, and I'm actually going to use one here for the sake of time. The drag and drop crop rotation you've seen already, and that's if you want to essentially create an entirely new crop rotation, you can choose that as a shortcut. But my shortcut I'm going to be using is this add conservation practices feature. This gives you a list of some NRCS conservation practice standards that are commonly implemented. And you can select it and it will automatically implement that change in management for you. So as I said, I want to convert to no tillage. So I'm going to select convert to no tillage. Unfortunately, a limitation is that you can only select one of these at a time currently. But you can then later go back in and manually add another change in management if you want to. So I'm going to select that and click add. And just for the sake of showing you, now when we look at our first year in our future scenario and we go to tillage, rather than intensive tillage, it's no tillage. So success on that front. Everything about this page works the same as the baseline. So that you'll have that same option to copy management to other years. Everything about it is the same. It's just only 10 years of future scenario rather than the 2000 to 2022. Okay, so I'm moving fast, but we're going to get through it all. I'm just clicking no thanks, all these options to add crops and all that. I could create another scenario. There's a limit of 10 scenarios I can make in the Cropland accounting activity, but I'm going to continue to animal ag. You might recall that for animal ag, I selected a demo project. So this is all going to be auto-populated with information. So these little pop-ups that you see, if you're creating a project from scratch, you're not going to see these. It's just providing some context. This is a demo project, but I can't actually change things. So because I'm interested in looking at information in Fort Collins, Colorado, I'm going to adjust my zip code. These can be different activities. I didn't have to change the zip code. I just feel like it. And so in this demo, we're looking at dairy cows, over 350 animals, including heifers and calves. Typically, if this weren't a demo, you'd have the option to select all the animal types that you're accounting for. So in this case, you can see dairy dry and dairy lactating are selected. Because this is a demo and these animal types have already been selected, I can't go back and change it. That is a limitation of the current situation. So yeah, that's why it's grayed out right now. One thing I forgot to mention is that for that property location, that is used for weather data within the context of your manure and housing management. So if your cattle are on pasture or rangeland, weather data isn't used, but you do still have to enter a zip code. You'll see, again, just like with Cropland, you have this option to set a baseline period. But if you're new to Comet Farm, we highly recommend starting with a single year of accounting. So your baseline is 1 year and your scenario is 1 year. You'd only want to set your baseline if you're managing your animals differently from year to year and you're experienced with Comet Farm. Your results, as we'll see later, are going to be presented as average annual tons of CO2 equivalent. So it won't matter if it's over 1 year or 5 years, if you're managing the animals the same that entire time. So I am not going to select a baseline period because we're just going to account for a single year of management. So I'm going to select save and continue. Again, as a demo project, this stuff is already implemented. But if I were starting from scratch, I would be asked to create herds. You are allowed to add up to 5 herds per animal category, and herds are only relevant to cattle, but we're working with dairy cattle, so it is. And herds are defined as a group of animals managed within the same animal category, but with different diets or different manure handling practices. So again, groups of animals that are managed differently. So I'm going to keep this all the same, but if I wanted to add an additional herd, it's just that plus button and naming it. Your default or your first herd is given a default name and you can't change it, just FYI. So I'm going to click save and continue. This is where I would enter animal details. Again, as a demo project, this is already implemented, but there are shortcuts available. So if I wanted to add 35 pasture range cattle, I could select this little arrow to copy them to all of those other boxes. I'm going to keep it at 0 just to keep that this demo project consistent. And then you have to enter information like average daily feed intake, average live body weight, stuff like that. And again, these tabs at the top are interactive. So rather than clicking next through everything, you are welcome to just click on the next one. But you do have to enter all of the data before you can continue to your next animal type. So the next would be to enter your types of feed. It's a little bit confusing, this table. We do have a website redesign coming up this fall. Where Comet is going to look pretty different. Functionally, it's going to work similarly, but we're working to make it a lot more user-friendly. So hopefully this will not be so confusing, but the idea is that you select the month that types of you're feeding your cattle different types of feed. There's the shortcut of selecting all months. And then what you would do is select a category of foodstuff, and then the specific type. You would add it to your selection, and then you would have to add a percentage of feed for all of those feed types so that they have to add up to 100. So like I said, it's not an ideal form right now, but hopefully it'll look a lot nicer in the fall. Next, you're asked to enter housing details. In this demo project, the cattle are housed in a roofed facility and manure is handled by flushing and scraping. But there are different options depending on what type of handling you use. Then you're asked to enter your manure system details. You get questions like if there's a solid liquid separator, separator type, and percent of solids removed. And these are all drop-down menus. And so if you don't see your exact method, pick something that is closest. And one thing I'll point out on the need help widget, for example, is if there is a manure system definition that is not already included, you can go to this help document and it'll list all of those, which I think is very useful. Next, you add your manure system details. And these questions will be based on what you've selected in the prior window. So because I selected composting, I have questions about composting, et cetera, et cetera. And as you can see, in this demo project, we are starting with an anaerobic lagoon as our manure system, and our future management scenario, which I'll show you in a moment, is going to be the installation of a digester. So that's the change in management that we're looking to assess. Lastly, you're asked to enter your manure details. These are defaulted, the values are defaulted by Comet, but this is the case across Comet Farm, is that if a value is defaulted, you still have the option to go in and adjust it. Nothing is set in stone for you unless it is grayed out. But yeah, so that would be the last step for this. Typically, once you've entered, so in this step, you'd go herd 1 of your first animal type, herd 2 of your first animal type, all the way through all your herds. Then you'd go to herd 1 of your second animal type through all those herds, and then to the third animal type. Those animal types are listed in this pane here, and it tells you which you're working on. But because this is a demo, all of that data is already implemented. So I'm not going to take too much time doing that. I'm going to click save and continue. And this is where I would have the option to create a scenario for animal ag. So if I were doing this manually, I would call this digester install. I'd copy management from my baseline. Again, very similar to Cropland. But I'll just give you a sneak peek at the demo project's scenario. So this is auto implemented as a digester install. And as you can see, the composting is kept the same, but an anaerobic digester was installed. And so some of the questions are a little bit different than before. Okay, so I know that this is a lot to take in. So I'm hoping, yeah, and I'm aiming for us to have time for questions at the end, which is why I'm rushing through. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and continue on to agroforestry. So in agroforestry, you're just going to be asked to state the location of your agroforestry operation. Again, these don't have to line up with one another. In fact, it's important for me to note that the comment modules, so like cropland, animal ag, agroforestry, are independent of one another and they don't talk to each other. So they don't overlap or interact in any sort of way. And so later when we look at our reports page, you'll actually see that all of those reports are generated separately. It's not a interactive report that accounts for interactions between these modules. That being said, I will keep it consistent and have us be in Larimer County. Just imagining that that's where all of my operations would be. So in agroforestry, you have the option to either enter in your own information or use a defined scenario. When you're entering your own information, you select from a species group, a species, and then you can either enter your tree DBH or age, and then total number of trees. Or if you select from a defined scenario, which I think is what I'm going to do in this case, I can select the scenario, I can put in the age of that kind of system, and then the size in acres. I will say that regardless of which selection you make, you'll have a limitation of the acreage, and that is limited to 1,000 essentially. However, you can add multiple scenarios or multiple sets of acreage, but results might get a little bit funky. We are looking to reinvigorate the agroforestry system, but that is the current state of it. So then you can add a scenario. If I wanted to, I could add the second one. In fact, I might as well add another one. Let's see, these ones will be 25 and we'll have, again, 100 acres of them. So entering, I think there was something I was going to say about, the options for these defined scenarios and the options for the tree species are specific to your location, or at least they're supposed to be. So you might see different options depending on what county you've entered. And yeah, so agroforestry is really just like a two-step process of selecting your location and then making these or entering this data. And so I'm just going to go ahead and continue to the report. And the nice thing here is that I can use this time while the report is generating to walk through a couple other things, and then hopefully we'll return back and that report will be ready. So a few things I want to highlight is these orange buttons at the bottom of the page have, if you see the word interpret, those are particularly useful PDFs for showing you kind of what your report means and what your values mean. So for example, if I opened up interpret cropland report, this is helpful in case I don't have a ton of time to go through all of the results today. I encourage you to take a look at this because it really walks you through what each value means, what each column means. And that same document exists for animal ag. And then within the help widget, there should be one for, agroforestry is present in the help document, but there's not an orange button for it. You also will see these options to export cropland files or to download an animal ag detailed report. These files are useful for troubleshooting, particularly in cropland, because it shows you kind of all the data that you entered and then the calculations used for estimating your greenhouse gas emissions. And so sometimes scrolling through, you'll see, all your numbers are normal except for one, and that can help you kind of get to the root of the issue. So as this report is generating, I'll also say that Cropland runs, as I've mentioned, using the DACENT model as well as the Surgo soil database and weather or Prism weather data set. And so this Cropland is going to take the longest to run. That's again dependent on your parcel size and the number of scenarios you have. We only have one parcel. It's not that huge in acreage, and we only have one scenario. So this should only take another minute and a half, I'm guessing. As you can see, we're on step 4 of 6 already. However, animal ag and agroforestry use empirical data or empirical calculations. And so those results are actually typically ready like that. If you are waiting for a report to run on anything besides Cropland really, and it's taking more than 30 seconds, it means that there's an issue. So I encourage you not to sit around waiting for, 10 minutes if it's for animal ag or agroforestry. So I'll go ahead and walk through animal ag while we're waiting for Cropland. As you can see across the top, we have our baseline emissions. So that's our business as usual, our current management. And then we have our scenario, which was the installation of an anaerobic digester. And then down the side, we have our animal category, so our 3 animal types. And then we have our herds. And so if I double click on one of those herds, I get a more detailed look at those emission calculations. And in fact, if I scroll over the calculator next to each of these categories, I can see what equation was used to calculate the emissions present here. What's probably going to be most relevant to users is this change column. This represents the change in emissions based on your change in management. So a negative number in green represents a decrease in emissions or an increase in sequestration. And so we can see that across the board for all of these animal categories, we are seeing a reduction in emissions based on the installation of the digester. And again, those detailed accounts are available for all of the different animal types. I'm going to check back at Cropland. We're getting there, perhaps. I hope it didn't just start over. That would be very annoying. Okay, well, I'll look at agroforestry in the meantime. So again, this report is a little bit different from Cropland and animal ag in that it represents the average yearly emissions in 10-year increments. And if I'm correct, this just represents amount of carbon sequestered in 10-year increments. But for some reason in the last column, it makes it a negative number in green, but not for all the other reports or all the other columns. Again, agroforestry, the results page is very confusing, and we are working on making it more user-friendly. So we are hoping to accomplish that by this fall, because we are perfectly aware that it is not ideal. When you double click on a species, it shows you subsource categories for where those emissions are happening. And then again, this is broken down by the 2 scenarios that you entered. You also, for all of these reports, will have the option to visualize these graphically. For agroforestry, you select one of your scenarios and it'll list that, or it'll demonstrate visually the total carbon stock for agroforestry. And these are broken down by species. So that same thing would be available for animal ag, would also have a visual report as well that compares your baseline and your scenario. Yay, our Cropland report generated. Great. So similar to animal ag, we have our baseline, our business as usual, and our scenario, which was the switch to no tillage. And then down the line, we have our source and subsource categories. You can double click or just single click actually on each of these in order to get a better sense of the specific emissions. And then again, that change category is probably what is most relevant. Again, the negative value in green demonstrates a reduction in emissions or an increase in sequestration. One thing to clarify about the results that are being generated, and this gets a little bit confusing, so I'm going to try to explain it as clearly as possible, is that your baseline emissions shown here as 16.8 mean these are the emissions that would occur if you took the last 20 years of your current management and continued them 10 years into the future. So those 10 years of the future doing what you're doing now is what is shown in the results as the 16.8. And similarly, the management scenario or your future management that you're estimating is if you did 10 years in the future of this change in management. So particularly the baseline, I think, is a little counterintuitive, because when you hear baseline, you think kind of like current or what's been happening, but both of these results are accounted for projections into the future, which is a little bit confusing sometimes. The last thing, I do want to leave time for questions. The last thing I'll say is that we have this greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator. And so if I see that our change in cropland management reduced our emissions by 28.5, I can go to this greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator and enter my my reduction in emissions, and it can be converted into kind of tangible, user-friendly values. So such as gasoline powered vehicles driven for a year, homed electricity for a year, stuff like that. So that's really valuable for reports and presentations and proposals. So we just want to direct people towards that.